I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb, so help me God.
The cameras rolled, the nation held its breath, and in one thunderous instant, the world changed. Prince William was sworn in as king before millions of stunned viewers. But as the nation erupted in cheers, one face told a different story. Camilla, pale, frozen, her expression etched with horror, became the haunting image of the day. What secret truths were buried behind that moment? What storm had truly begun? The atmosphere inside Westminster Abbey was unlike any other coronation in living memory. It was not the carefully orchestrated grandeur of tradition, but something raw, urgent, and improvised. The walls that once echoed with centuries of ritual now seemed to tremble under the weight of an unexpected transition. Every note of the choir sounded rushed. Every prayer seemed heavier than usual, and the air itself carried a tension that no crown could disguise. This was history unfolding in haste, the monarchy fighting to keep its dignity while battling against time. King Charles was there, his presence both commanding and subdued, a living symbol of irony. After waiting a lifetime for the throne, his reign had ended almost as quickly as it had begun. His crown, still warm from his own head, now slipped into the grasp of his son. Though he tried to remain composed, whispers of abdication rippled through the gathered elite, spreading unease like wildfire. The sight of him seated in silence, no longer as sovereign, but as a father stepping aside, was as unsettling as it was heartbreaking. And then William stepped forward. The prince who had never imagined this day arriving so suddenly now found himself center stage, standing where only kings belong. His posture was steady, but his expression revealed a storm inside. The oath he swore carried the weight of both destiny and dread. His words quivered slightly, not from weakness but from the enormity of the responsibility now pressing against his chest. This was no triumphant rise, but a reluctant one, forced upon him by a monarchy in crisis. Yet in his reluctant grace, there was strength, and the nation could not look away. At his side stood Kate, serene, yet undeniably shaken. She wore the poise of a queen, the composure of a woman stepping into the most scrutinized role in the world. But beneath that calm exterior, her eyes betrayed an anxious determination. She understood that her family had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Every glance, every gesture she made carried an unspoken message. She was ready to support her husband, even if the crown brought more burden than glory. The public's reaction was instant and overwhelming. Some cheered with unrestrained joy, their voices echoing through the streets of London, convinced they were witnessing the dawn of a bold new era. Others looked on in disbelief, confused by the speed, unsettled by the break in tradition. Around the globe, television screens flickered with the same moment, every nation dissecting what it meant for the future of Britain and its monarchy. Social media erupted into a frenzy, hashtags and headlines competing to define the moment before it had even ended. But as powerful as William's words were, and as moving as the image of Kate's quiet strength appeared, all attention was drawn to one corner of the abbey. Camilla sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly, her lips pressed thin, and her face was drained of all color, pale, stricken, almost ghost-like. That expression told a story no microphone could capture. In her stillness, the truth of her devastation was laid bare. For her, the coronation was not a celebration but a funeral for dreams built over decades. It was not her victory, it was her erasure. Cameras captured it, froze it, broadcast it. And within seconds, her expression became the most replayed image of the day, stealing headlines and eclipsing every triumph. At that moment, history was not only about William's rise, but also about Camilla's fall. For every cheer that echoed in the abbey, there was a gasp that rippled across television screens at the sight of her pale face. And so, the story of this coronation was not one of unity, but of a fracture of triumph and tragedy colliding on live television, leaving the world to wonder what had truly happened behind the palace doors. But to understand why Camilla's face turned pale, we must rewind back to the hidden storm inside Buckingham Palace that forced history to shatter overnight. Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, Whispers carried more weight than speeches. In secret chambers, advisors huddled, files slammed onto polished desks, and ultimatums were delivered with icy precision. King Charles faced the unthinkable: a monarchy under siege from within. The revelations that emerged threatened not only his reign but the survival of the institution itself. And as the clock ticked, one question loomed. Was the crown about to be sacrificed to save the throne? It began with a dossier, thick and damning, slid across the king's desk by his most trusted aide. Within its pages lay evidence too grave to ignore: espionage infiltrating the monarchy's inner circle, leaks that traced back to trusted courtiers, and financial irregularities buried within the royal trusts. Funds that should have supported charities and national heritage were tangled in a web of questionable dealings, and coded correspondence hinted at secrets slipping into the hands of foreign powers. What might have once been dismissed as rumors was now undeniable fact, and Charles understood at once. This was not a scandal that could be silenced. It was a time bomb, threatening to detonate beneath the foundations of the crown. His advisors spoke with the cold efficiency of men who had weighed the stakes and knew the cost of hesitation. They insisted that the monarchy could not endure the storm if it were seen as complicit or weak. The solution they presented was both shocking and surgical: an emergency modernization that demanded sacrifice. Abdication, though unthinkable, became their rallying cry. Better to present the crown as forward-looking, dynamic, and willing to renew itself through William than allow headlines of betrayal and corruption to destroy centuries of legacy in a single day. Their voices cut through the chamber, each word tightening a noose around the king's heart. For Charles, the weight of their proposal was unbearable. After a lifetime of waiting, decades spent in the shadow of his mother, the throne had been his only true destiny. And now, barely a breath into his reign, he was being asked to surrender it. His dream of service was colliding with brutal reality, and there was no elegant compromise to be found. Every instinct told him to resist, to cling to what he had long desired, yet the eyes of his advisors reminded him of the larger truth. The monarchy was bigger than one man, and its survival might demand his sacrifice. The pressure was not confined to the palace alone. Insiders from Parliament had already caught whispers of the storm. Senior figures, fearful of public outrage and political upheaval, pressed relentlessly for action. Before the press uncovered the dossier, they knew that one headline, one leak, could unravel the fragile confidence of the people. Their message was unyielding: act now, or risk an implosion too devastating to repair. The monarchy was on the edge of a precipice, and delay was no longer an option. Through it all, one figure remained in the dark: Camilla. While the palace raced against time, she prepared for her daily duties, unaware that the ground was shifting beneath her feet. For years she had fought for her place, endured public disdain, and finally achieved recognition as queen consort. Yet, even as she adjusted her jewels and reviewed her schedule, decisions were already being forged that would strip away the crown she had clawed her way to wear. And yet, even the king himself could not face this storm. Alone soon, he would deliver news to Camilla that would shatter her world. In a quiet palace sitting room, Charles finally told Camilla the truth. His voice trembled, his hands heavy with guilt. Her reaction was instant and devastating. The woman who fought decades for acceptance, who endured Diana's ghost and the nation's scorn, now faced her greatest nightmare: to lose the crown, not by scandal of her own, but by the betrayal of forces she couldn't control. Camilla's horror etched itself into history that morning. Charles began slowly, almost in a whisper, the weight of his words pressing on every syllable. He explained the revelations, the dossiers filled with secrets too dangerous to keep hidden, the advisors demanding an emergency handover. His eyes betrayed the torment of a man cornered by history, torn between love and duty. "It is over," he confessed, each word striking her like a hammer. "I must step down, and William must rise now." Camilla stared at him, her face frozen in disbelief. The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving, tearing through the illusions she had built over a lifetime. Her disbelief quickly unraveled into despair. She stood abruptly, her voice breaking as she demanded, After all we've endured? After everything I sacrificed? Everything I've borne? This is how it ends? The walls of that gilded room had heard countless royal arguments, but never had they witnessed such naked anguish. For Camilla, this was not just a political defeat, it was a personal annihilation. Decades of ridicule, mockery, and endless comparison had finally been silenced when she took her place as queen consort. And now, in the blink of an eye, that hard-won triumph was slipping through her trembling hands. As Charles tried to calm her, another name filled the silence like a ghost: Diana. Though unspoken, Camilla could feel her presence rise again, haunting every corner of the palace. The comparison she had fought against for so long now resurfaced with cruel force. Diana had been adored, immortalized, untouchable. And now, Kate, young, graceful, and untainted, was poised to step effortlessly into the spotlight Camilla had clawed to earn. The shadow of Diana, once endured, was once again suffocating, reminding Camilla of her place not as a queen remembered, but as a woman forgotten. Her fear of erasure consumed her. She imagined history books skipping over her name, photographs of state occasions reprinted without her, patronages she had built and handed to Catherine without hesitation. Every dream she had nurtured for her legacy turned to dust in that instant. Her body betrayed the depth of her despair. Her hands trembled so violently she could no longer clasp them together. Her skin drained of color, her breath unsteady. Words spilled from her lips, not measured or strategic, but bitter and sharp. She accused fate itself of cruelty, spitting out the thought that she had been tolerated, never embraced, and now discarded entirely. In that moment of devastation, seeds of resentment began to take root. Though she loved Charles, though she had stood by him through scandal and sacrifice, the reality was clear. This loss was not just forced by nameless enemies, but embodied in William, the son who now became her undoing. She knew the nation would celebrate him, that the world would cheer his ascension, and in those cheers, she heard the erasure of her own identity. It was not merely the loss of a crown, but the birth of a bitterness that would mark her heart forever. But as Camilla's world crumbled, William's was just beginning to tilt toward destiny, summoned with urgent whispers that his time had come. Prince William never expected the call to come so soon. Mid-speech on climate change, he was pulled aside and words whispered that froze his blood: constitutional emergency. Within minutes, he was racing toward the palace, the weight of centuries pressing against his chest. When he arrived, nothing prepared him for what he saw. His father diminished, his mother-in-law shattered, and the crown itself hovering like a curse. The time for waiting had ended. The crown demanded him now. The interruption was swift and merciless. One moment he was immersed in statistics, speaking of rising seas and fragile ecosystems, and the next he was pulled away under the guise of urgency. The words repeated in his head like a thunderclap: constitutional emergency. Rarely uttered, those words carried a power that eclipsed any crisis he had ever imagined. His pulse quickened, and though his outward composure remained calm, every fiber of his being braced for catastrophe. The journey back to Buckingham Palace felt endless, though the driver sped through the streets with ruthless efficiency. The silence inside the car was deafening. William's mind darted through grim possibilities. Was the king gravely ill? Had the monarchy fallen victim to scandal? Or was the institution itself on the brink of collapse? He clenched his jaw, each second stretching into an eternity, until the palace gates loomed ahead like the jaws of fate. Inside the corridors of power, the atmosphere was suffocating. Advisors whispered in tight clusters, their eyes heavy with secrets they dared not voice. Kate was already there, her arrival just as sudden, her expression steady but filled with unspoken fear. Their eyes locked across the marble hall, and in that brief moment, husband and wife became pillars for each other. She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, and without words, they promised to face whatever storm awaited together. When the doors of Charles's study opened, William was struck by a sight he would never forget. His father, the man who had carried the crown with determination, now looked small, aged beyond his years. The fire in his eyes dimmed by resignation, Before him lay a document of abdication papers bearing the cruel finality of ink and law. Charles's trembling hand hovered over them, as though history itself resisted the stroke of his pen. The room reeked of inevitability, and William felt the ground shift beneath him. Then came the plea. Charles lifted his gaze, eyes wet with sorrow yet burning with paternal pride. "Save the monarchy, my son." The words pierced William like an arrow. They were not a command, but a desperate entreaty from a father who had carried the burden as far as he could and could no longer. It was the passing of a torch no son could refuse, yet every part of William resisted. He had always known this day would come, but not like this, not suddenly, not without warning, not without time to prepare. The thought of his children overwhelmed him. George, Charlotte, and Louis, innocent and unaware, now stood at the edge of history without even realizing it. The normal childhood he had vowed to protect for them seemed to crumble before his eyes. The image of his eldest son as future heir filled him with both pride and dread. Could he bear the crown and still shield them from its crushing weight? The walls seemed to close in as the decision loomed larger than life. William's chest tightened, his breaths short, his mind drowning in questions. But one truth pressed against his soul. The monarchy was not a choice. It was a duty, one that demanded sacrifice whether he was ready or not. But the machinery of monarchy waits for no hesitation behind closed doors. Chaos erupted as preparations for a lightning-fast coronation began. The palace became a war room. Footsteps thundered, phones rang, ancient books of law were dragged out of vaults. Advisors worked like men possessed, condensing centuries of tradition into hours. William, still reeling, was shoved into a crash course of kingship, and through it all, one figure retreated into silence, Camilla, watching her destiny dissolve piece by piece. The air within Buckingham Palace turned electric, charged with a sense of urgency that stripped away ceremony and replaced it with survival. Senior officials dusted off abdication precedents not used in living memory, thumbing through brittle documents that spoke of kings who had once walked away from their crowns. They argued over every word, every clause, desperate to ensure that the monarchy's continuity would not be questioned. The corridors hummed with frantic energy, as if the very walls understood that history was being rewritten within them. Staff rushed in all directions, their tasks clear yet overwhelming. Chambers were transformed overnight, and plans for a stripped-down coronation emerged with brutal clarity. Gone were the weeks of rehearsals, the polished rehearsals of grandeur. What remained was a ceremony pared down to its skeleton, one that would be broadcast to the world in a matter of hours. The palace, normally the epitome of order, now looked and felt like the center of a storm. Yet the speed was necessary. Every delay risked leaks, headlines, and chaos spilling into the streets beyond. William was at the heart of it, thrown into a relentless briefing. Advisors fired instructions at him about what oaths he must swear, which symbols carried the most weight, and what gestures would reassure a shaken nation. He had no time to dwell on fear, no room for hesitation. The lessons that were meant to take years were compressed into minutes, and every word spoken to him carried the weight of centuries of duty. Still, behind his steady gaze, the tremor of disbelief lingered. This was not how he had imagined the crown, not how he had prepared for it. Kate was swept into her own whirlwind, balancing roles that collided without mercy. One moment, she was a mother, clutching the hands of her children, explaining with quiet bravery that their father was now to be king. The next, she was queen in waiting, pulled into briefings, her wardrobe decided in haste, her schedule redrawn entirely. Yet she carried herself with the poise that had always defined her, her strength an anchor not just for William, but for the institution now reshaping itself around them. Behind closed doors, her calm voice steadied the storm, but in her heart, she wrestled with the loss of the life they had once shared in private. And then there was Camilla. Alone in her chambers, she stared at the purple gown laid out for what was supposed to be her season of triumph. Jewels glistened beside it, reminders of a queenship she had fought for, endured ridicule to claim, and now saw vanish without ceremony. The silence pressed against her like a suffocating weight. She had dreamed of wearing that gown in triumph, Now it mocked her, a symbol of what she would never truly have. Her destiny had shifted in the blink of an eye, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The palace pulsed with inevitability. Decisions were made not with debate, but with urgency, as though time itself had declared war against hesitation. William was no longer the prince waiting in the wings. He was the king in waiting, with the seconds ticking down. Tradition bent, rules were shortened, and the monarchy, normally so slow to change, moved with dizzying speed. Every person within those gilded walls felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders, and none more so than the man about to wear the crown. And then came the moment no one could stop the ceremony itself, raw, urgent, and unforgettable. It was not a coronation of splendor, but of survival. The throne room glowed with strange urgency, every flashbulb capturing history in motion. Charles, weary but resolute, signed away his crown. William, pale yet determined, knelt before the archbishop. And then came the image that the world would never forget. Camilla, rigid in her seat, her face drained of color, her grief exposed to millions. In 1 second, triumph and tragedy fused, the monarchy reborn in heartbreak. The ceremony unfolded like no other in living memory. Stripped of grandeur, it bore the weight of necessity rather than celebration. The chamber, normally reserved for ritual and reverence, pulsed with an energy closer to panic than pageantry. Every movement felt hurried, every prayer rushed, as though the crown itself demanded to be secured before the storm outside could break. It was solemn, but the solemnity was different this time, born not of tradition, but of desperation. All eyes turned to Charles as he stood before the gathered assembly, his crown gleaming but his spirit visibly exhausted. The cameras closed in, their lenses unflinching, capturing the tremor in his hand as he lowered his pen to paper. With each stroke of his signature, he surrendered not just the throne, but a dream carried across a lifetime. The world watched, as the man who had waited longer than any heir in British history gave up the role he had barely begun to fulfill. His weary hands, caught in endless replay, became the symbol of a reign surrendered too soon. Then came William's moment. Called forward, he knelt before the archbishop, his shoulders tense with the unbearable weight of destiny. The oath slipped from his lips, steady but edged with strain, his voice cracking under the enormity of what was being asked of him. This was not the voice of a man seizing glory, but of a son thrust into history's glare with no chance to prepare. Yet in that trembling oath, there was a resolve that silenced doubt. He would not flee from duty, no matter how suddenly it had arrived. Beside him, Kate rose with a presence that stunned even the skeptics. Draped in simplicity, yet radiating strength, she carried herself with the composure of a queen already born for the role. As William's oath ended, she stood tall, her hand resting lightly on his, her gaze unwavering. The nation, watching through countless screens, saw in her not just a consort, but a partner whose steadiness could fortify a fragile monarchy. In that moment, she was hailed, unofficially, undeniably, as the new queen of the people's hearts. The chamber erupted, with the cry that has marked centuries of history, "God save the King." It was not a cheer of unrestrained celebration, but a cry of relief, of endurance, of continuity. The words echoed like thunder, drowning out hesitation, sealing William's ascension before the world. For a fleeting instant, the monarchy appeared unbroken, renewed in the face of chaos. And yet, amidst the chants, the most unforgettable image was not William crowned, nor Charles stepping aside, but Camilla. Sitting stiffly in her seat, her hands gripping the arms as though clinging to the last vestiges of her place, she could not hide the devastation etched across her face. Her pallor betrayed the turmoil within, her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and though she fought to maintain composure, the world had already seen enough. That single expression captured, broadcast, immortalized spoke of loss, betrayal, and an erasure she could neither fight nor forgive. That image raced across headlines before the ceremony had even ended. For many, it became the defining symbol of the day. The pale, stunned face of a queen consort whose crown had slipped away without ceremony. Her heartbreak laid bare for millions to dissect. In her stillness, the tragedy of the monarchy was made human. But while the cameras captured her anguish, the deeper story was William's readiness, or lack thereof, for a crown thrust upon him. Was William truly ready? Some said yes, pointing to his years of preparation, his statesmanship, his calm under fire. But behind the scenes, he was a man-torn father, husband, son, and suddenly king. Could he shoulder the crown thrust upon him overnight? The first hours of his reign would answer that question, shaping how history would judge his rule forever. For years, William had been quietly molded for this moment, though no one expected it to arrive so abruptly. His presence on the global stage, speaking with authority at climate summits, negotiating in hushed tones with world leaders, representing Britain in moments of crisis, had marked him as a statesman in the making. He had learned to walk the delicate line between compassion and command, carrying himself as a figure both relatable and regal. Yet nothing in those experiences could fully prepare him for the reality of being king before dawn had even faded on his father's abdication. Outwardly, he seemed composed, his voice steady, his movements deliberate. Cameras captured him stepping into his new role with an air of calm resolve. But those who saw him in private understood the truth, that beneath the surface, turmoil roared. He was not just William the king, he was William the son, who had watched his father surrender the throne in sorrow. He was William the husband, whose wife now stood beside him in the most scrutinized role in the world. And he was William the father, terrified of what this sudden rise might mean for the childhood he had vowed to protect for George, Charlotte, and Louis. Kate became his anchor in those early hours, steadying him when the crown threatened to crush his shoulders. Her presence was unshakable, her words few but her support absolute. She reminded him that while the monarchy demanded his public strength, their children needed his private tenderness. It was her unwavering calm that allowed him to walk through those first steps of kingship without faltering, her hand always just within reach to remind him that he was not alone. But no matter how strong he stood, he could not escape the comparisons that shadowed him. The ghost of Diana lingered in every whisper, every headline, every unspoken expectation. To many, he was not simply William, he was Diana's son, the boy who had walked behind her coffin, now grown into a man carrying the weight of a crown she had never lived to see him wear. The world measured him against her memory, and the contrast was both a blessing and a curse. Her spirit gave him credibility, yet her legend raised the bar to heights no mortal could ever fully reach. Still, when he spoke his first words as king, there was no hesitation. Calm, measured, and carefully chosen, his declaration was born of crisis but carried the tone of stability. He honored his father's sacrifice, promised service to the nation, and vowed to uphold the crown not for himself, but for the people. It was a speech that reassured millions, though those close to him could hear the strain in his voice, the burden of a man who knew he had been thrust into history's glare before his time. But while William's strength steadied the monarchy, Camilla's unraveling left a wound that no crown could conceal. For Camilla, it was not just a crown lost, it was an identity erased. Overnight, her calendar emptied, her charities reassigned, her titles slipping like sand through her fingers. The woman who once defied the odds to be crowned beside Charles now sat in the shadows, watching Catherine rise where she herself had stood. And that pale face from Coronation Day became her enduring legacy. The days that followed were merciless. Where once her diary was filled with engagements, visits to charities, appearances at state banquets, and quiet meetings that gave her purpose, suddenly, it was blank. The calls stopped. Invitations no longer arrived. Causes she had worked to support were quietly handed over to Catherine, who accepted them with the grace of someone stepping naturally into the role. For Camilla, every lost duty was another reminder that her reign, however brief, had been wiped away with the stroke of a pen. She had not merely lost the crown, she had been erased from the very machinery of royal life. Her bitterness grew in silence. Watching Catherine ascend with such effortless ease cut deeply, for it highlighted the one truth Camilla had fought against for decades, that the nation had always seen someone else as more deserving. Catherine did not claw her way into public favor, she glided into it. While Camilla had endured decades of scorn, ridicule, and relentless comparisons, Catherine's warmth and dignity seemed to win hearts without effort. It was this contrast, played out in the merciless court of public opinion, that made Camilla's fall feel like more than a loss of power. It felt like humiliation. The media only sharpened the wound. Every channel replayed the footage of the coronation, pausing on that single devastating moment. Her pale face, her stunned expression, her heartbreak caught forever in the unblinking eye of the camera. Headlines called it the freeze frame of history, the moment when the monarchy pivoted from one era to the next. Analysts dissected her every flinch, commentators debated her legacy, and social media turned the image into endless memes, stripping away even the dignity of her silence. She became not just a woman who lost her crown, but a symbol of defeat. A cautionary tale in a ruthless Game of Thrones. Yet, in the midst of ridicule, there was also a flicker of sympathy. Online, the hashtag Camilla's heartbreak trended, with thousands reflecting on the cruelty of her fate. People who once mocked her now pitied her, pointing out the irony of her long struggle. For decades, she had withstood criticism, outlasted gossip, and finally won her place beside Charles, only for it to vanish in a single day. That irony was too stark to ignore. Legitimacy fought for over a lifetime, undone overnight. But sympathy could not erase her private grief. Behind the palace doors, she maintained civility, smiling when required, speaking with composure, never allowing the world to see her bitterness. Yet in her solitude, the facade cracked. Friends close to her whispered of tears shed in silence, of late-night ruminations about what had been taken from her, of questions asked in despair that had no answers. She carried herself with grace in public, but in private, she bore the weight of loss no title could heal. Yet even in tragedy, the monarchy marched forward, ushering in what many called a new golden dawn under William and Catherine. A year later, the monarchy looked reborn. King William, steady and beloved, Queen Catherine, radiant and unifying. The nation felt renewed, though scars still lingered. Charles found peace as an elder statesman, but Camilla, her pale face from that live broadcast, remained a ghostly reminder of how quickly crowns can vanish. History would record this day not only as William's rise, but as Camilla's fall, and the echoes of that moment still shape the monarchy's fragile future. William's first year as king became a crucible that tested him at every turn, yet he emerged stronger than many had predicted. Diplomatically, he won admiration for his calm authority and thoughtful presence among world leaders, earning respect not just as a monarch, but as a statesman. At home, he leaned into accessibility, visiting communities, listening to grievances, and embodying a monarchy that felt closer to its people. What began as reluctant acceptance transformed into genuine trust, and by the year's end, William had secured his place as a sovereign not merely tolerated, but deeply admired. At his side, Catherine's rise was nothing short of remarkable. She carried herself with a grace that never appeared forced, her empathy and warmth radiating through every public moment. To the world, she represented continuity, a bridge between tradition and the future. While William bore the weight of kingship, she gave it humanity. Her ability to comfort the grieving, to inspire young people, and to engage with international leaders positioned her not just as consort, but as a queen in her own right. Her presence softened the sharp edges of William's sudden elevation, and together they formed a partnership that breathed life into the monarchy. Charles, though no longer king, discovered peace in stepping away from the crown. Relieved of the suffocating expectations he had carried for so long, he embraced a quieter role, dedicating his time to philanthropy, environmental causes, and personal reflection. Freed from the relentless scrutiny of being sovereign, he became an elder statesman whose wisdom still mattered, but whose burdens no longer crushed him. In that release, he found dignity, and in service outside the throne, he carved a legacy that felt authentic. The monarchy itself, once teetering on the brink of collapse, found a way to steady itself. The chaos of abdication gave way to stability, and the fears of a fractured institution faded as the people rallied behind William and Catherine. Tradition bent but did not break. And in that bending, the monarchy rediscovered its resilience. The scars of crisis remained, but they became reminders of survival rather than omens of destruction. Yet, for all the triumph, one image refused to fade. The world could not forget Camilla's pale, stunned face at the coronation, the silent scream of a woman whose world had unraveled before millions. It replayed endlessly, seared into collective memory, a symbol of fragility. While William's reign gained strength, Camilla's legacy dwindled, her heartbreak becoming a cautionary tale of how quickly power can slip away. That frozen moment became a haunting echo, reminding the world that behind crowns and ceremonies, human lives unravel in ways the public rarely sees. And so the monarchy endures, reshaped forever by one day, one oath, and one pale face that revealed more than words ever could. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.